We'll call this Public Service Committee meeting to order. Approval of the minutes dated February 10th, 2015.
Move to approve, Erpenbach.
Second, Kylie.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, first agenda item we have today is the subdivision access. We'll have Director Mike Cooper and Fire Marshal Dean Lanier presenting today with any other input from any other audience members and council. Mike Cooper, take it away.
Good afternoon. Mike Cooper with Planning and Building Services. And we're not going to be talking about the mobile food vending ordinance, but
Really?
that's fine. Just to kick this off, I wanted to start out by just talking about, as a council, on occasion, you will be getting items for your consideration called preliminary subdivision plans. Those are typically development areas that have gone through the city staff review. They go to Planning Commission for a recommendation, and then they come to you for final consideration. Those are based on our subdivision ordinance, which is also a document that is approved by the City Council. The subdivision ordinance is the guide that we use as staff to review subdivision plans, and they go through review by a number of different departments, including Planning and Building Services, City Engineering, Fire. In some cases, it will be Parks and Recreation, Community Development. And in terms of what you get presented, one of the main graphics is the layout of the streets, where the streets will be constructed, along with preliminary plans for the different utilities, whether it's water, sewer, or storm drainage. But in terms of the street layout, the subdivision ordinance has standards that if you are fronting on an arterial street, how many access points you're going to be allowed, what system of collector streets would be required to be built by the developer that would connect to the arterial streets as well as to the local streets. It also provides that if you're abutting adjoining property that is planned for future growth, then we have to accommodate that adjoining property with some connectivity to streets. Or if the developer that's coming in for approval is going to connect to existing adjacent streets, then we have to make sure that that's accommodated. So there's a lot of different things that go into that decision-making process before it actually comes to the City Council. We have a major street plan that we also use that identifies where the arterial streets and collector streets would typically be provided. So as we work through this discussion today, for the larger subdivisions, in many cases, they're divided into phases. In other words, the phases can be based on the timing of the development. The phasing can be based on if they're in different sewer basins within that development area. But the developer will tell us if they're going to divide up into phases, how that's going to be provided. And Dean will talk to you about some of those examples, because as we get into this discussion about connecting streets and having more than one point of access, there's a lot of different factors that can determine when that would happen. So that's the subdivision ordinance review. But the main part of the discussion today, or the presentation, would be, in addition to the subdivision ordinance, we have a fire code. And that's what Fire Marshal Dean Lanier is going to walk through with you today, and specifically talk about these requirements for secondary access roadways that would accommodate emergency vehicle access. And when we get done, we'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. So Dean, I'm going to let you go with your presentation.
Good afternoon, Dean Lanier, Fire Marshal of Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. Today I'm just going to review just 4 subdevelopments within the city that have been problematic in the past. There's some causes and reasons for those issues and problems that we've been working through, but they are the areas that are probably of most concern. In the International Fire Code, there are several different areas of the code that come together as a puzzle that provide a good perspective on how do we meet the minimum requirements for fire safety in our community with respect to subdevelopments. This section of code is adopted in the code as a appendix to the code. It provides a couple of exceptions in there which really provide the fire marshal some flexibility in applying these requirements. You identify that there's a 30 dwelling limitation on the access into a subdevelopment where there can be a single access, and after that point, you need an additional access brought in to provide for emergency vehicles. It provides some additional flexibility where it ends with that as determined by the fire code official in exception 2. We have written a policy that provides even further clarity on that specific exception and how we will apply it with respect to subdevelopments. Section 104 provides some remoteness requirements that are applied when subdevelopments are first submitted for our review and approval. Really what we're trying to do is not try to gain access to a subdevelopment in the long term through one single access point. That can be problematic if we're talking about a larger development. There are some significant differences, if I could just draw for an example, in contrast between Rapid City and Sioux Falls. You will see a far more dramatic urban and suburban interface between what is grassland and then suddenly you're in a subdevelopment. We don't really have that same type of setup here in Sioux Falls, so we really try to work with the geography to try to bring in as often as possible 2 separate access points into a subdevelopment. To give you an overview of the 4 different subdevelopments we'd like to talk about, Canterbury Heights being the first. This is the original preliminary plans that were submitted to us back in 2006. They identified access points and then what the potential was for future growth. Director Cooper would probably be able to speak more to the importance of preliminary plans, but ours is to look at them and see if the plan fits within the framework of what we can accept within the fire code. This is what actually exists today. This is an overview or an overhead map of the subdevelopment as it is today. I can tell you the areas that are outlined in red to the northeast and then to the south are the areas in which we've scoped out for emergency access roads. Now they are temporary roads, not permanent. So the surface itself is something less than what would be acceptable for a normal travel road for normal traffic going through that subdevelopment. The second area is Diamond Field Estates. This is located off of East 41st Street. This was the initial plan that was submitted to us, again, back in the mid-2000s. This is how that subdevelopment appears today. You can see from the access from 41st Street that there is a temporary surface that is to the furthest west, the main street for access into the subdevelopment in the middle, and then hidden quite well is the one to the east, which is this one shaded in yellow. I would doubt that many people in the subdevelopment know that that access point is there, but it is meant as an emergency access. We have been working with the developer for several months, probably even more like close to 2 years now, to provide us some additional access points into this subdevelopment. Whispering Woods is a development off of 57th and Southeastern. It's a larger development in the southeastern portion of the city. This is the way it appears today. You'll notice that there is a small highlighted red area off of 57th Street where it has been serving as a temporary access point into that development. As the roads start to fill in, this development is actually moving quite quickly right now. Woods Edge Trail has actually extended south and west almost to the point where it could be connected to Bonson. It is not quite filled in yet, but it is almost to that point. When that connection is made, we will no longer have reason for this small temporary access point off of 57th. Finally, Legacy Ridge is a subdevelopment off of T. Ellis Road. and 22nd Street. It too has been around since the mid-2000s. This development for quite some time had one single access point off of Stony Creek Street. There were a limited number of homes that were being built. However, over the past year, there's been quite a bit of progress made with extending what is Galave Street to the south until it meets 22nd Street, and that is a usable temporary road at this point. So with that last exhibit, I'll ask for any questions that you have for me.
Any council questions? Councilor Stagers.
Yeah, I was just curious. In the last 20 years, how many fires have we had in these kind of subdivisions? Any idea?
I could go back and pull that data. The last 10 years of data is a little bit easier for me to get to than the last 20, but I can go back and pull that data for you and certainly give you a depiction of what that looks like on the map. We do track all fire activity within the city, but normally I try to stay within a 10-year window. Once we start getting back more than 10 or 15 years, I start wondering about how good that data is in comparison to what the city is like now.
Yeah, that's fine, 10 years. But am I correct maybe in my assumption that there's probably hardly any? I mean, these are kind of, well, new areas. And when I think of fires in Sioux Falls, I think in mostly older areas. Or am I just wrong?
Well, I would be cautious about saying that we only have fires in old homes. The number one cause for fires in the city of Sioux Falls is kitchen fires caused by unattended cooking, and oddly enough, that occurs at every demographic within the city, as well as different homes within the city. So while I can tell you that I can't exactly tell you whether or not there have been fires inside these homes, inside these developments, I have personally worked the fires that have happened in larger end homes in some of the more affluent areas of the city.
Okay.
Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the report. Would you go back on your slides to Canterbury Heights, please? That's kind of the one that brought us to this conversation, as those residents were very concerned last fall and continue to be concerned about access to their homes as construction goes on. Would you look at that red access line at the top?
Yes, ma'am.
I haven't been out there for a while, but I think Councilor Anderson has, and I may ask him to come help us explain this. But that road, when you say, Dean, Fire Marshal Dean, that road is accessible for emergency vehicles, what do you mean? You mean I can't drive my Ford Focus across that, but you could drive across it if you had to. Is that what you're saying to us?
That is correct. The code allows us the flexibility to have fire apparatus access roads, and they have to meet a certain standard as far as what type of surface it's made out of, what's the compaction of that surface. It isn't meant necessarily to be a normal driving route for everyday citizen. It is meant as an emergency access point to be able to get fire trucks and emergency vehicles into the area in case of an emergency.
If I might, Madam Chair, I think there are two issues. I'm just going to continue to pick on these folks because they have been so vocal with us. But number one, again, two issues. One is that construction traffic doesn't have more than one access into this development, and I'll talk to Mike about that in a minute. But the second issue is that it's not just about fire access, is it? I mean, if there's, God forbid, a tornado there, and their main access is blocked, but they need to get out, obviously. They're not safe. They need to get to shelter. If they do own a Ford Focus or another low-riding car, again, I don't mean to pick on Ford, but a low-riding car, they're not going to be able to get out of there necessarily with their vehicles. Are we concerned about that, and how does that play into this conversation?
Really, the standard that we have applied to this really only uses the fire truck as its preferred vehicle traveling up and down that road. So whether it can be navigated by a smaller vehicle that doesn't have four-wheel drive, that's something that hasn't been included within fire code and something that I wouldn't want to guess about.
Right. So, I mean, to take that scenario a step further, we'd go in and get them. If they're really trapped, we're going to go in with emergency vehicles and
Absolutely.
get them. Okay, then my last question in this sort of section is regarding sort of developments in general, and I think you've answered it, but I want to make sure I'm clear. When we were talking about Canterbury Heights a few months ago, I got a lot of pushback from people in a lot of other neighborhoods who said, wait a minute, we only have one driveway. We've only got one way in and out of our neighborhood, and I can list several of them off the top of my head. Talk to me about, is it the age of is this a rule that came in only in the last few years? Is it the age of the development? How do you determine, whether where I live gets two roads or not?
Well, it's based on what the plan is submitted during the subdevelopment review process. At the point of 30 homes, which is in fire code and has been at least since 2000, it is required to have another separate access point. Now, that can be an emergency access route for fire vehicles and emergency vehicles only, where the surface is a gravel surface or one that can be navigated by an emergency vehicle. But after that point, we start working with the developer to make sure that they have a plan for how they're going to link that whole subdivision together. I would share with you that amongst these examples that I gave you, many of these became problems as a result of issues we had during the economic downturn. So when they popped up on our radar, they were in situations where there was not a lot of growth going on here. So the remedy for repairing them has been the growth that occurs from this point forward has to be in a planned way so that it links these communities together and we don't isolate them with a single access point.
Okay. That really kind of wraps up. That was my other question for Mike, was how much of this was affected by the 2008 drop? So many things dropped out of the bottom in that time period, and some of these folks bought homes in that time. And
two of them stand out in my mind specifically. That's the development Diamond Estates and then Legacy Ridge were both developments that sat stagnant for a while. And there was not a whole lot of activity going on in them. So it's been a long road to even get the temporary status of these roads to this point.
Good. Madam Chair, can we ask Chad to come forward?
Come on up.
I think Chad's offering answers.
Chad Hebe with engineering. I will say of the four that Dean was talking about, three of them are now being managed by different developers than the original one. So Whispering Woods is the only one that's managed by the person that started the development. So three of the four went through some hard times. The original developer is out of the picture now, and new entities have stepped up to get them to where we are today. So.
Good, thank you.
Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. I guess it comes down to the difference between temporary roads and what we're considering to be permanent roads in and out of the developments. And again, if the development exceeds 30 units, then it requires two access points, one of which could be classified as a temporary road. So there could be a perception that, hey, I only have one way in here, but they're failing to recognize that they've got the temporary access point, which is not preferred to them because I take it most of these are gravel or maybe sometimes even worse.
Like I explained earlier, these roads were built for fire truck access. So, general clearance on a fire truck is far higher than you would find in most economy cars nowadays. So it really is built for a much robust vehicle than what most would drive for commuter traffic.
Because I think some of the pushback that we're getting as council members is the concern from the neighborhoods, the developments where it is developed. They maybe have that second access point that's temporary, but people are using the primary paved area, and then they get an increase in traffic and traffic speeds and children, because a lot of these are new developments with young families, and so there's concerns relating to that. And I guess at what point, even if we ran into this with the Canterbury Heights addition, do we require that temporary access becomes a permanent? Because that seems to be the issue that we're dealing with.
Exactly, and I think the other challenge is to distinguish between the road that's required by the subdivision ordinance versus the fire code requirement. They're really two different things, but in the public's mind, they're not necessarily different, because the purpose of the fire code was specifically to provide for emergency vehicle access. And it could be a fire truck, it could be an ambulance.
Correct.
A lot of the fire calls are medical emergencies. But the other thing is that I know the public is getting more concerned about construction vehicles in their neighborhoods. And I'll go back to the subdivision ordinance does not distinguish between a secondary access for construction vehicles. Historically, construction vehicles are driving on residential streets that are in different stages of development. So again, the emergency access road is not intended, at least by the fire code, it was not intended to be another route for construction vehicles. But now that we're hearing more public comment, and I know questions from the councilors, we can certainly go back and look at our ordinance if there's ways that we can improve on that. When we approve these development plans, as I said at the beginning, and they're divided up into phases, we don't really have a requirement that you have to finish phase 1 in 1 year, and then you have to finish phase 2 in 3 years. We haven't really gone that route. We do have the assurance agreement that we provide for to make sure that those improvements do eventually get done. But again, as we work with the developers, it might be beneficial to maybe have more input as far as the timing of these phases. Is it going to be something that will get done in 1 year? Is it going to take 5 years? That might be helpful as we come through with the review process before it gets to you.
And I think that was kind of the next part of my question. In addition to going by the number of units in the area, having time limitations in the initial plans, I think that would be helpful, and you're exploring that already.
We will be, yeah. And I think too that one of the changes that I've seen since the recession now is recovering is that prior to that, developers would come in with larger tracts and they would put in more improvements in a larger area. And now we're seeing them coming in with smaller, they're dividing the development up into smaller components. So they're doing smaller geographical areas at a time because of the investment that they need. And just in some cases, the market is a little bit slower than it used to be.
Because I do agree that it goes beyond fire issues,
Right.
related issues, and it does only take one fire. And if we had a situation where we only had one access and we needed a second, I mean, obviously that'd be very tragic. We want to avoid that at all costs. Especially this time of the year. I'm with the frost coming out of the ground, even well-maintained gravel roads are sometimes impassable by smaller vehicles, let alone fire trucks. So there's concerns there. So I think the more we can do to kind of beef up kind of that timeline, the better off that we would be.
Yeah, and again, I think we will do that. We'll take a look at that. The subdivision ordinance is the guideline for the permanent construction of roads and utilities. And then the fire access is really the temporary emergency. So we'll go back and Chad, I appreciate Chad being here today too, because engineering has a huge involvement in this whole process, and we'll take a look at some things. And we have the Home Builders Association represented here today. So we can certainly go back and just look at, are there ways that we can improve on this process and maybe the time frame that we bring to you.
Mike, thank you for being here. I don't know if the rest of you will, but each one of these is, there's no that are two or that are alike. And like for this one for instance, They started on Dubuque or on Cactus Drive because that half of the subdivision, the sewer goes by gravity to the west. The rest of this goes to the east, thus the last piece of this will be the east of it when that sewer comes in. If we go here to Diamond Fields, both on the west road and the east road are different property owners. And they're probably going to be on different schedules and different phases, and so there takes some coordination with that. This one here, let me back up one. In Whispering Woods, the road coming down is Bonson, but the property that Bonson goes through is outside the city limits, and thus that property owner at this point is not ready to come into the city nor ready to develop. So we have to wait until that land comes in. And then out here on Legacy Ridge, 22nd Street is that bottom gravel road. The owner or developer has come in and said, we are ready to build 22nd. The problem is he's got to build that road in conjunction with the property owner on the south. And so now you have an issue where the north is ready to go, the south isn't. Now, how do you build half a street? Do you build a full street? How's it financed? Who pays for what? When did if the guy on the north pays for it all, when does the guy on the south pay his half back? And so, none of these are alike. There's always challenges associated with them all, and sometimes it takes a lot of work and time to get where we need to be. So.
See, I got them all revved up. We could solve this problem right now. No, Chad did provide you with some really good information because, again, these situations are very different. And as I said also at the beginning, within our ordinance, we do have those standards that you have to allow for adjacent property to connect to your future development, or at the same time, if you want to connect to the adjoining property owner's development, there has to be some accommodation for that. And the way that gets negotiated and worked out, as Chad just talked about, can sometimes be somewhat challenging, but that's part of the development process that we get involved with all the time.
Councilor Uppenbach.
So we've talked about from the developer level. Let's talk about it from the homeowner level. You've pretty much convinced me that I'm never building a new home in this town. There's a reason I've always bought homes that we're ready to move into, and I've been in developed areas. This kind of scares me. So let's talk about those homeowners that really do want to build new homes. And it's an exciting way to, you're going to expand your family, you're going to start a new life, you're moving to a new school district, whatever. What kinds of things do we, number one, have in place that maybe kind of protect them? But then what are the things that those folks should be thinking about and asking about as they look at some of these developments, especially these that have been sitting there a while? Are there protections that we can talk with them about?
Well, we don't typically get involved with the actual home builders because that also happens well after the subdivision plan gets approved. But, there's that phrase, buyer beware, and I think the home builders try to do a good job of, or whoever is selling a lot or building a house on a lot, to let people know what the future plans are. I don't know how the city staff could get more involved at that level. We do issue building permits for homes, but in many times that's to the contractor and not to the actual resident. But I don't have a really good answer to your question other than, again, when we bring these forward to the council, if there's any way that we can help point out some of these kind of situations so that people know ahead of time, well, in order for this street to get built, it's going to take the cooperation of the next door property owner, or this street is planned to be built next year and this other one 3 years from now. Maybe that's one way that we could help educate as much as possible what's going to happen. But I've built 2 homes in Sioux Falls, and in both cases, I had to deal with construction traffic, and everybody that builds a house, they have to deal with construction traffic at some point.
I kind of assume that.
Yeah.
But if you're building in a new place, there's going to be other people building in there too. But it's that whole idea of are there enough streets? Are the adequate streets going to be built? Those sorts of things, I think.
But we do look at that in terms of the standards. We are pushing for as much connectivity as we can get within these subdivisions. There could be physical limitations, there could be property owner limitations, but we do try to work hard to make sure that there's, at some point, as much connectivity or access as we can. So,
Go ahead.
One more for Chad, then, if I could. If we could go back and look at Canterbury Heights one more time. Something that you said about sewer stuff strikes a chord. Other than nobody's buying, is there anything keeping the rest of that east side of this development from being done? I know Marlowe needs to be built down to 10th or whatever, and there's several things that need to happen there. Are there sewer issues? What are the things that might be keeping them, other than just lack of interest? Are there structural issues there?
There's no structural issues. It's the sewer is right over here.
Okay.
The issue is that this is a separate property owner.
Okay.
And so it's technically, there's got to be cooperation by all involved to get that sewer funded and expanded and extended over to here so that this developer now can pick it up and use it.
Because the homes that are there now that we can see in that area are all served by the sewer system that's on the other side of the rise.
It all drains to the west, exactly.
Okay.
And another thing too that we do get questions on when you're building in a new subdivision is, of course you're not going to have mature trees usually, but you may have a house and there may be 6 houses this way that have sidewalk. Now the next house going to the left is, the next 6 lots are vacant, and then there's 3 or 4 houses built on. The sidewalk goes in when the homes are built, and so you got to deal with, there's going to be some sidewalk, and we, when we get to a point the subdivision gets 95 or 90% done, then we will, if we have to order sidewalk in, then we will come to you and ask for that. So, so that's another item that you just, along with the construction traffic, you have to deal with. So,
right. Thank you.
Any other questions from the council? I have a couple. Whoever wants to answer. I understand that they submit that preliminary plan, but it's just that, a plan. And so what was pitched to some of these neighborhoods, they had an expectation that that's what was going to be in and happen. And it's unfortunate that that didn't happen, especially Canterbury Heights is fresh in all of our minds. I've also been talking with a homeowner in the Diamond Valley area as well, who's been pretty frustrated in watching everything happen. And so those plans are just that, it's a plan. And I think they thought it's, a mandate or it's going to happen. And so I think that's what some of the frustration has in there as well. My question is if the whole city has been evaluated for any of these. Is it just the 4, or have we evaluated the entire city for this?
One of the things I can tell you as far as emergency response is that's something that we track and work analytics on a monthly basis. So if there are areas where we have problems getting to those areas of the city, we are well aware of them. Right now, I'm not aware of a subdevelopment in the city that we're far beyond what our requirements are. Our normal response time is 5 minutes and 12 seconds. I'm not aware of an area of the city that we're having severe problems with, but as the city spreads out and grows, almost inherently areas are going to become more remote from fire stations, and that's where we come back with a plan for growth and development of a newer fire station. So we have all the analytics for those. We actually track every single medical response and every single fire response in the city. We do keep that information over a time, and we are graphing those response times every single month to see if there's any trends that should be taken a closer look at.
Okay. And, my hope is that we are I understand you're tracking the analytics, but we need to make sure that we are proactive in identifying these neighborhoods as well and not saying, oh gosh, there's a fire, whoops, we can't get in there. And what happens if it is identified and somebody is saying, well, hey, what about me over here on this particular development? What's the process? Contact you?
So there's processes in place now that we know about the development far in advance of what's going in as far as streets. So through that process of subdevelopment review, we're well aware of what the construction looks like from a planning stage. We're also well aware of what has already been built. I'm out in the communities at least twice a year driving through doing windshield tours with folks from planning as well as engineering. We are spending time out in the streets of the city looking at the problem areas and developing strategies far in advance of the problems occurring.
So if there is one, should they contact you?
Absolutely.
I'm just saying there has been one that's in question, then send them your way if they're having concerns?
Certainly, they can send them our way, and then we'll direct them if they have some more in-depth questions that need to be answering by other departments.
Okay. Anybody in the audience have anything to contribute? I know that there's been a lot of conversation, and I've talked to many other counselors. Counselor Anderson, welcome.
Kenny Anderson, Jr., Sioux Falls, South Dakota, counselor of the Northeast District. A few questions that I have on this is that, number one, when this all started, you know, looking at Canterbury, you see the two red lines or the two different access roads there. This development had started years before. Yes, it did change hands, but these temporary emergency access roads did not happen until after the city council really started taking a look at this. And the one that goes on the far north of this photo here, the last time that I was out there, and it would be weather similar to what we have right now, that road was not accessible. Matter of fact, the contractor told me directly that they wouldn't even drive their tandem trucks on that. So if I'm not going to have a tandem dump truck driving on that, I sure do not want my fire trucks on it. They did use a crushed rock. I don't know exactly what the compression level was, but when I walked out on there, it was spongy, which does very much concern me. The other thing is the word temporary. When we had the housing issues in 07, 08, we're now talking as 2015. We need to make sure that the temporary becomes permanent. And it isn't so much, I think we're getting caught up in fire code instead of talking about emergency services. And that is any type of emergency call and being able to get to those roads. And I can use a great example that's right in this area. I don't know which one here actually works, but right on this road right here was a great example. This is a private road. This is our public road for city. There was no street sign there. And this area right here is also annexed into the city and has, I believe, 3 condos in there. And at one time there was a couple ladies who had medical issues, and there was at least 3 calls where the firemen couldn't find the place. So those are the type of things that as we develop these areas, that we need to ensure that not only our developers, but our city administration is staying on top of them to make sure that the codes that we pass, the laws that we pass for these type of developments are actually being enforced. And once again, I'm going to go back to, you look at this picture, there's a lot more development happening over there right now than what you see developed or you see on this picture. And once again, we're over the housing shortage. And if this is something that needs to be addressed through our planning and zoning ordinances, then it's something I encourage this committee to move forward and take a look at that to see what changes need to be made. And I don't have all the answers in place, but that's the discussion that happens between the council, the administration, and the developers to come up with a plan to make sure that we build these additions safely to our city. Let's see. On the Sioux Falls Fire Rescue handouts that they gave each and every one of you, the one dated 5/1/2013, Policy Bulletin D-01, in addition to a single emergency access road, a temporary access road shall be provided prior to the number of dwellings exceeding 30. And then after they exceed 30, when's the secondary road become permanent? 30, 40, 50? And that's sort of some of the things that I've been looking at and hoping that we can get taken care of. Temporary access roads for emergency response only shall meet the following, and it gives a list, but it doesn't say how long. If it's temporary, there should be some type of expiration. And then on the other insert, section, it was point E, surface, asphalt, concrete shall be acceptable surface, temporary, consisting of 6 inches of gravel compacted to 95% density. Shall be acceptable when asphalt or concrete cannot be provided due to seasonal constraints. So does that mean once we hit our summertime, our construction period, should that road be changed to something permanent? I think those are some of the things we need to take a look at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson. Anyone else in the audience or any other comments, questions by the committee? Councilor Rubenbach.
Thank you. So Mike Cooper, help me talk through this with what Councilor Anderson has just pointed out. I mean, he's spot on. I mean, what's the definition of temporary? We've got 4 of them, and Chad says 3 of these locations have changed ownership. So at what point do we, kick it up a notch? At what point do we say, here's our definition of temporary, and you've far exceeded it? And I would imagine the folks that live in Canterbury Heights are thinking temporary means a lot less time than what they've dealt with.
And the other examples that we showed.
Right.
So again, we're offering to go back and review this. I don't think I know the subdivision ordinance hasn't been updated since probably 2008. And so with your input, we would certainly be open to going back and reviewing this to help answer some of these questions.
Yeah, I guess I can't speak for the committee, but I'd really like to see that happen. I'd like to see you come back to us in the next couple of months, but it's,
yes, I agree. I think that's a great idea. I think that the conversation definitely, the conversation today is warranted enough to make sure that we kind of continue the dialogue and the conversation to make sure we're identifying any other neighborhoods, as well as what are we going to do in the future for these, as well as having the safeguards if a property is sold or abandoned or transferred hands or anything like that. We just need to be prepared so those homeowners that are currently there are protected as well.
And one of the things that we did with the council that was led by engineering was to totally revamp those assurance agreements, and I think that was a great step.
Yep.
That's helped us now moving forward, but
Yeah.
this is certainly another issue that we can take a second look at.
right, these are the ones that fell through the gap between the downturn and the new assurance agreements. So we got to figure out how to cover them.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I would suggest, Mike, 2 months. Is that, look at May? Is that
We'll shoot for
Is that sufficient? Let's tentatively plan for May to revisit the conversation, see any potential suggestions. And I encourage you to reach out to any of the committee members and also Kenny, Councilor Anderson, with any maybe suggestions that are warranted. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I look forward to the continued conversation. And next up, we are going to be talking about the proposed ordinance update on mobile vending. Adam Roach with Neighborhood Development. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me again. Adam Roach with the Community Development Department. As requested at the last meeting, I'm bringing forward a draft ordinance on mobile vending. I want to stress that this process started over a year and a half ago and was very inclusive of all stakeholders. That included established downtown businesses, mobile food vendors, and a multitude of city departments. With so many moving parts and parties affected, it was important to have all stakeholders involved to help shape this policy. So again, we'll rehash the purpose of this ordinance. There is currently no ordinance that clearly allows mobile food vending on the public right-of-way within the downtown central business district. Our goal with this proposed ordinance is to formally allow mobile food vendors to operate within the central business district and provide clear and concise guidelines for mobile food vendors, those that operate established businesses within the central business district, and for the multitude of departments that work on an annual basis with mobile food vendors. I think it is important to reiterate that mobile food vendors offer a unique experience to a thriving downtown, and we embrace this type of food culture in the City of Sioux Falls. We also recognize that downtown establishments have made significant investments into their businesses. Therefore, we are trying to strike a balance between established businesses and the mobile food vending community with this policy. The health and safety of the public was the utmost priority when considering this proposed ordinance before you. We have worked diligently with health, fire, and police to ensure that all the bases are covered in terms of health and safety. As for the process, extensive research has been conducted on how other communities have been handling mobile food vending, specifically the National League of Cities Mobile Vendor Report, which was a guiding document for our research. A series of meetings have been held with our internal team that included Councilor Erpenbach, Jim David, Downtown Sioux Falls Incorporated, Economic Development, Police, Licensing, Fire, Health, Public Parking, and the Attorney's Office. Invitations to stakeholder meetings were sent out to all the restaurant operators located within the Central Business District to seek feedback on any issues or insights that they have had in terms of mobile vending. And all mobile vendors that had a current peddler's license on file for 2014, this is about mid-year when we started this process, were contacted and invited in to participate in discussions about regulating mobile vending. Participation was better than we anticipated, and we garnered a lot of great feedback. A majority of the guidelines initially proposed were welcomed amongst the mobile food vendor community and did not appear to be an inhibiting factor to those that want to vend or to those that currently vend downtown. So this is very important in the process is defining mobile vending. Currently, mobile vendors are defined under peddlers, but they're not really peddlers. They don't go door to door. The hours of operations for a peddler are limited to 8 p.m. So what we looked at is adding a mobile food truck, mobile food vending, a mobile food vendor, and mobile food vendor central business district. This would be an added section to Chapter 117, which addresses peddlers and vendors within the community. The following, I already went over the definitions there. These added definitions would really provide that clarity, because when somebody comes in and says, well, I want a mobile vend, well, you go down and get a peddler's permit. Well, I'm not a peddler. But you can see where the confusion lies with the public, with the mobile food vendors, and also with our internal departments. It is important to note that mobile food vendor defines those operations on private property, while mobile food vendor central business district defines those operations within the central business district. If you tell somebody they have a mobile vending permit, then they say, well, I can operate anywhere. But if you specify it to mobile vending central business district, then there's that tag of specifically where they can operate. On to permits. In comparable communities across the nation, fees range from $290 to $800. A middle-of-the-road approach was taken, as we do not want fees too high to hinder those from starting up a mobile vending business, but high enough to cover staff time spent on mobile vendor application, processing, and other associated costs. So when I say middle of the road, I'm taking into calculation the fee that I'm proposing for mobile vending, and then adding in the health component as well. And they pay about $269 for a health fee, a component for inspections and so forth. Currently, under the peddler's permit, mobile vendors pay a $35 fee, and this amount would not change to vend on private property. And like I said before, it would change from a peddler's permit to a mobile vending permit. But to vend on private property and in the central business district, the proposed fee is $75. So that would be one flat fee of $75 to vend on private property and to vend within downtown. And if you want to just vend solely on private property, it's a $35 fee. So mobile vending guidelines that would apply to, just general guidelines that would apply to private property and also the central business district. Mobile food vendors are held to the same food, health, and safety standards as restaurants. None of that would change. Nothing with the health department would change. They would still be doing their annual inspections and so forth. Vendors would be required to provide trash and recycling bins and clean up the area within 25 feet. This is a common practice seen across municipalities. Hours of operation are proposed to end at midnight, Monday through Thursday, and 2 a.m. Friday through Sunday. Concerns of hours of operation have been raised by police, business owners, and residents that live above the commercial properties within downtown, and we certainly appreciate the council to weigh in on this matter. We've heard anywhere from, they want them shut down from 12 p.m. to 3 a.m. More residents would want them closed around midnight, where the mobile vendors themselves would like to operate until 3 a.m. because they think that the peak of their business is from that bar close and so on. Also, from a health safety component, all vending units utilizing liquid petroleum as their fuel source would be required to have a third-party inspection to ensure they are meeting fire standards. And Fire Marshal Lanier and myself talked about this, and we think it would be sufficient if they were to provide a receipt from their petroleum, because those businesses that offer liquid petroleum within the community would not fill up a tank that does not meet guidelines. So that would be sufficient for what we're looking for, so it would not be an additional fee. All mobile vending related permits must be visible from the concession window, so patrons can be reassured the mobile food truck meets local health and safety standards. This is guidance from Councilman Kiley. I too think it is important for people that come from out of town that can see that these are bona fide businesses within our community. And similar to our sidewalk cafes and patios downtown, mobile vendors would be required to maintain a policy of insurance to protect the applicant and the city. Currently under the peddler's permit, they are required to have a bond for up to $1,000. But that really doesn't cover any incidents that would be related to mobile vending, such as a fire, accident, different things like that. So that would be very important to include as well. Now, guidelines specific for the central business district. Parking would not be allowed in diagonal spaces, as conducting transactions in parking spots creates a safety issue. Also, a number of these vehicles are longer than 22 feet, so they would stick out into the roadway. Mobile vendors would be treated like any other parking customers in terms of rules and regulations. Meters would need to be fed for the utilization of public parking spaces. And we propose implementing a 100-foot buffer where mobile food vendors will not be able to operate from established restaurants unless they have written permission from each restaurant operator located within that buffer. Of course, if those restaurants are closed, that would not be an issue for mobile vendors that want to vend outside of those establishments. We looked at a number of buffers ranging from 100 to 300 feet. The map that you have in front of you is for a 100-foot buffer. And lastly, for requirements for the central business district, we have fielded complaints in the past that vendors do not want to pay the vendor fees at events. These would be special events within downtown. And so they set up shop right outside of the boundary of that event. This policy will protect, so what we're proposing is a 300-foot buffer from these events. And this policy would protect the mobile food vendors' investment of paying that event fee and those organizations that are hosting the event that rely on the vendors' fees and the revenue to pay for hosting those events. And with that, I would like to open it up for any questions.
I'd like to go back to really, I guess, page 2, the purpose. And number 1 here, I just want to reiterate that there is no ordinance currently in place that allows mobile vendors. So that's why we're here today.
That is why we are here today. Currently, commercial vehicles are not allowed to make transactions in the public right-of-way.
Not that we're trying to restrict them or restrict them further than what they already are or anything, but we're trying to provide an ordinance that allows them to do what they're doing.
That is correct. I mean, this came to us a few years back when mobile trucks became popular. We liked the idea of them there, and we would only follow up on a complaint if there was one. We wouldn't say, hey, mobile food trucks are not allowed, move on, because we like what they add to the ambience, and just trying to see how it would all play out within the city.
And if we can move to definitions then, because we have the second to last bullet point, we have a mobile food vendor, and that's basically dealing on private property. Then we have mobile food vendor CBD, Central Business District. I guess my first question is, have we defined what the Central Business District actually is? The
Yep.
boundaries of the Central Business District?
Yes, we would use the same boundaries that have been adopted for the bid. It's Minnesota 14th, kind of jogs between Franklin Avenue and Weber Avenue, and then down to, I believe it's North Drive.
And I guess my question is, do we potentially have a category that's not represented here, which would be mobile food vendor OCB, which would be outside the Central Business District?
Mobile food vendors that would operate outside of the Central Business District are only allowed on private property.
Okay,
And
so
not
they can't be in the public
right-of-way.
right-of-way.
Correct.
Outside. Okay.
Correct.
And then I guess my last question, at least right now, so public right-of-way could involve parallel park taking up multiple parking spaces.
Correct.
What's the process in a situation like that in terms of feeding the meter, or what are their responsibilities?
They would have to feed the meters that they take up. So if they're taking up 2 spaces, 2 meters, 3 spaces, 3 meters.
Okay.
And they would have to follow the same standards, such as the hours that are limited to that area, then also the zone restrictions as well, where you can only park in one zone, one parking zone within one day.
And I do like, the fact that when we do have special events, that they can't park themselves right up next to a special event if they haven't paid the fees that all the other vendors have paid, that they are required to stay at least 300 feet. I like that. I think that's well thought out. And then within 100 feet of an established restaurant, unless they do have the consent. So there is still that avenue to be allowed to vend there if they work with the existing restaurant owner.
That's correct, and we do have quite a few that work with specific individuals. Their kitchen closes at 10, and they welcome the mobile vendors to set up shop outside of their business.
Right, so there's flexibility there.
Yes.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Councilor Rippenbach.
Couple of things. One kind of dovetails off the last question that you were talking about.
Sure.
Is I watch certain reality TV shows, and one of the things that they do is go in and what is it, bar rescue or something, and they couldn't figure out how to cook food in this place, and so they made a deal with the mobile food vendor outside, and they actually linked them up so they're taking orders on their apps, and then the guys from the food truck bring it in. This could be really cool. But then my question is, and it kind of involves Dean, because all we're saying now is as long as I've purchased if I'm running a food truck, I purchased the tank of gas, and we're assuming that wherever I fill it up, looks at that tank and says it's cool and you're good to go. Lakeville, Minnesota just had an explosion of a food truck on a driveway in a residential district that damaged a couple of houses and destroyed cars, and fortunately no one's injured beyond, in life-threatening situation. Do we need to rethink that? Am I overthinking this now that we're kind of in this conversation? Do we need to think about how do we, because that's what Minnesota is saying now too, maybe we need to be looking at this stuff a little closer, more than just the can of gas. Do we need to look at more than that?
We do have an ordinance in place where no commercial vehicles are allowed in a residential neighborhood.
That's
so
true.
in Sioux Falls,
Okay.
technically that mobile
And
food
Lakeville,
truck would
Minnesota
be-
might have that though too. That would be the other side
that
of it.
is very
that,
true, and it's on a complaint basis. so-
Right? Our commercial vehicle ordinance is on a complaint basis. If I don't like it, then I'm going to call it in, and then you're going to go check on them. I don't know, something to think about. I don't want to make it harder than we might be already making it, but I want people to understand that we do have sort of that safety in mind, and that all those pieces are worked out. And then I guess just for feedback, I know that you asked earlier, but hours wise, I like these hours. You know, I'm pretty good with hours. That was really my big concern was, you know, how does downtown Sioux Falls feel about it, and then how do those people that live above? And we know that the sound travels up.
Yep.
So how do those people, they're the ones I'm most concerned about when it's, you know, midnight or 2 in the morning and there's still drunk people out there yelling for tacos. That, you know, those are my concerns, but I think it looks good the way that it is, so.
Councillor Stagers.
Yes, Adam, you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, the primary reason for this ordinance is for health and safety of the citizens of Sioux Falls. Is that right?
I think it's multifaceted, but I mean, that's the utmost concern is the health and safety.
So what are the new health and safety regulations that you have in this ordinance that we don't have already?
There are no new health and safety regulations. They follow the current process under restaurants.
Okay.
So they aren't treated any differently.
Okay, so
But from a health
they're
and
already
safety
covered.
standpoint, we don't have any fire inspection controls in there, anything like that.
So they're already complying with our health and safety that we have right now.
A good percentage are. We have had a bad apple in the past who didn't.
Yeah. Well, we already have the regulations. But the health fees, can you clarify that a little bit? How much are the health fees?
I believe the health fee is $269.
$269, and then if you got the Central Business District permit, that's another $75, and that would be a total of $344 for 1 year. Is there any other fees they're going to have to pay?
If we would require them to have an insurance policy, $1 million liability, as we do with any of the sidewalk vendor cafes, that would be an additional fee as well.
Okay.
But in comparison of our fees to other communities across the nation, significantly lower than the average.
Well, that's good because these people have to sell a lot of tacos to pay for this.
That's correct.
These fees that we
Yep.
have, right?
And we've seen communities that really want to price mobile vendors out, and that's not our stance here.
Because it seems like this ordinance is not so much for health and safety. It's designed to make restaurant owners happy, and also, well, that's primarily, it seems to me, what this ordinance is all about. Is that fair to say?
I politely disagree with you, sir. When we receive calls about gentlemen that are interested in mobile vending within downtown, the process is not clear. When you're having them operate under piecemeal regulations within our ordinance, this would really simplify things. There would be a mobile vending section that would really spell things out for them instead of us trying to look through different ordinances and, well, this might fit or this kind of fits, and so you fall under this. What we're really trying to do is legalize it so they can operate within downtown. That's the ultimate goal. But in addition to the health and safety, fire, all those components.
Once again, this is for downtown.
It also affects the mobile vendors that operate on private property as well.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Kiley.
Okay, thank you. Again, as my first point was that we currently do not have an ordinance that allows mobile vendors to operate in the city of Sioux Falls right now. So that's one of the primary reasons why we're here today.
Correct.
I don't know that I would agree with Councillor Stagger's comment that it's set up for the benefit of our current brick and mortar restaurant owners, but rather if I were going to go into the food vending business, I would have to guess it's going to be a fairly sizable investment on my part to become equipped and with the vehicle and everything else. I would look very carefully if there wasn't an ordinance that would ensure me that I could even operate. I don't know that I'd want to go into a venture like that if it wasn't clear to me that I had the right to operate. So I think that's probably one of the primary purposes here. In terms of the health and safety of the public, to me, the requirement of clearly displaying their required certificates that they've already have to have, I think that speaks to the health and safety of the public, because I, as a individual, would like to know that, number one, that this individual has jumped through all of the hoops to do what it is that they're doing. Going back to the hours, what was the general thought of the mobile vendors that participated in the earlier discussions on the no vending between 2 a.m. 6 a.m.? Were they fine by that, or do you recall?
Most of them wanted the 3 a.m., the latest as possible. All the communities, and I shouldn't say all, but a majority of the communities looked at across the nation, it's the 2 a.m. And that's where our recommendation is the 2 a.m.
Okay, and then
I have talked to 3 mobile food vendors since I first brought this to committee. They were okay with the 2 a.m., but they want to see the 3 a.m. But I went through the regulations that we proposed, try to give them a good grasp of what we're looking at, and there really are no concerns with it, except the time.
Sure. And was there an opportunity, too, for the permanent residents of downtown Sioux Falls to voice their opinion on this matter?
That was kind of an afterthought of specifically inviting all those people that live in the residences above. As a former resident of downtown Sioux Falls, I certainly agree that when you look at a property, you don't factor in mobile food vendors parking out there at night. You're looking at it during the day. Of course, you can see a bar across the street and you anticipate that noise, but you don't anticipate 4 or 5 mobile food vendors outside your window every Friday and Saturday from 10 to 2 or 3 a.m.
Absolutely, because they have a vested interest in this as well.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Rippenbach?
2 things, Adam. One, there are very few, but a few ice cream trucks that drive our neighborhoods, our residential areas. Where do they fit in this?
We went round and round on ice cream trucks and thought about defining them as well. We came to the conclusion that they do meet the peddler because they are going street to street in nature.
Okay, and they're not parking per se. They
That's
stop
correct.
at
They are making the transaction and they're moving along.
Okay, then my other question is about sort of what's next for this ordinance. This has come from you. You've spent a huge amount of time with it, with staff and with those that are involved. Are there neighborhood meetings going to be involved? What happens next with this ordinance?
We would like to take any recommendations that you folks have and incorporate those into what we have here, and then host a public meeting inviting all the mobile vendors. We can certainly invite the residences, the established businesses downtown, and get the word out that it's a public meeting for all.
Mm-hmm. Before it comes back.
Before it comes back to.
So will it come to us as an informational meeting, or will you just bring it then as a draft ordinance and we'll do first and second reading?
I think we can bring it forward as a draft ordinance to first reading.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Cool. Thanks.
Before I maybe make a couple of statements, is there anybody in the audience that wants to say anything? Councilor Rolfing?
Hi, Rex Rolfing, Councilor at Large. This may sound stupid, but I have a little experience with this a long time ago because I got my son and a friend of his to do some mobile vending downtown Sioux Falls for the summer. And you're right, there's nothing on the books, and they just kind of let us do what we wanted to do. We parked across the street from the First National Bank, and he sold hot dogs and different things out of that, and it worked out very well for him. It kept him out of trouble for a summer. But one of the things that I look at here is when it says licensed operable vehicles, does that mean motorized or non-motorized, or both? I think there might be some kind of a definition there that needs to be almost of that to say that, because the one they had was non-motorized, they pushed it, and it worked out well for them, but somehow that might need to be identified or defined a little bit more. Secondly, would this have any negative impact, Adam, on vendors at a soccer tournament at Yankton Trail or a softball tournament at here in town at Harmonen or anything like that? Would this have any bearing on them?
That would not have any impact. That's under parks.
That's under the parks. Okay. Just wondered about that as we get ready to do that kind of thing. And the other thing that really that interests me, or I question, not question, but I think we need to define, maybe maintain a policy of insurance protecting the applicant and the city from what? From damages or from liability? They're kind of they can be two different things. I think Councilor Karski would agree with me on that. The liability is one thing, but maybe, what happens if they break something, or the cities or something along those lines? It could be a different type of thing. So those are the things that would this allow them also? The last question I would have here is, would this allow them if a business, let's say, said, why don't you just come along downtown on Phillips or off of Phillips and just pull it up onto the edge of the sidewalk, and don't take a parking place, but just go up on the sidewalk. There's enough room for people to still get by. I can see, I'm just looking at what ifs here, and I could see, I don't think it maybe defines what's public and private and that kind of. If it's a private, they can maybe do that, right?
That's correct. Yep. If they were obstructing.
Go ahead.
Will you come in from the microphone? Thank you. And will you address with that a cart on the sidewalk?
Correct. Yep.
Or a vehicle or a moped or whatever?
Currently under ordinance, carts and stands are allowed within the central business district. That was changed under the sidewalk use. That's when the patios and cafes were allowed. So stands and carts are allowed within downtown under ordinance. I will look into the insurance requirements, whether it's for liability or damage, and address those. And then as far as a mobile vendor parking on the sidewalk, I don't think that will fly with our human relations department and the ADA accessibility. But we certainly have had requests where businesses do want the mobile food vendors to park outside their restaurant for their or outside their business within downtown for their employees, and that has been becoming more popular in the past.
As far as the carts and stands, do they have to pay a fee, or are they considered the peddler? What?
They fall under the sidewalk use ordinance, so they would get a limited lease to utilize that space, the public right-of-way.
And what do they pay for that?
They pay a $35 fee.
But not the extra $75 or health inspection or any of that?
Correct, yeah. As if they have food carts,
Like hot dogs?
Yeah, I'm about certain they have to be inspected.
Any other council questions? I know there's another person that would like to. Sir, come on up. Please state your name. And thank you for being here.
My name is Peter Chang, and I own a food truck, so if you have any questions for me about that. One of the concerns that I have was that I was not informed of any of these meetings, although we started our food truck last September. So I was only informed by another food truck vendor this afternoon. So I was not called or emailed or anything like that. Another thing is the definition of mobile food vendor and the CBT. Currently, we go out to businesses like Cigna, which is in an industrial park. It is not in a residential area. And according to what Adam had said about the CBT, that you're either downtown or you're not going to be doing anything. I think Councilor Staggers maybe asked, what was outside of the CBT, what would you do? And he said that there's just no vending in residential areas, but there's industrial parks as well that are within the city limits, I believe. So I don't know what, if there's anything to do with that. I have a lot of questions. I've never done any of these meetings before, so I have no idea what to say. I do think that food trucks should be regulated. I think that there should be regulations, of course, as far as safety, but we've done all those things. And I believe there was another question that I had earlier, but I'll have to come back next time, I guess.
And feel free to email us as well if you have additional questions, or Adam can answer them as well. Adam, can you address the industrial parks area for Peter, please? And all of us.
Sure. I would like to make a comment that Mr. Chang he came in after our process, and I want to say it was about 2 weeks, but I did inform him of everything that we are considering. He said that he didn't have any problems with what we were proposing, and I saw him operating numerous times within downtown. We have not received one complaint on him, and we have had no communications. He was staying out of people's business and just doing the right thing. As far as industrial parks go, the ordinance is that no vending is allowed in the public right-of-way. I'm not sure if he's operating within the private property at the industrial park. So you're operating on the street in the industrial park? That's nothing that we have considered. We were always under the impression that these folks were parking on private property and making those transactions. But if it's something that you would like to add.
I just want to make sure that he's
explore that
able to
some more.
continue doing his business and not having any hiccups with continuing his business with where he's operating right now. I mean, I guess he could go into a particular said location and say, hey, do you mind if I park here? But they may not want him to park in their parking lot, I don't know. But to be able to still operate on a public right-of-way, just pull up shop and be able to be accessible to other areas. I think just to make sure that we include that so he's not hindered in that. Councilor Sagers, do you have any?
I still think that there is that necessity for maybe an OCBD, outside the business district, because if a business industrial complex does not want them on their property for, let's say, liability reasons or whatever the case is, that we don't want to necessarily preclude them, especially if they're not interfering with traffic. So I guess I would just suggest that you still look into yet maybe that other category.
Sure. Well, we're certainly not opposed to that. I think the only thing that we would have to look at is the residential zoning and refrain from having food trucks parking in our residential neighborhoods.
Right, and I think that's one of the ways that you could deal with that, is it would have to be a commercial setting, an established commercial setting.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Councilor Sagers.
Yes. So just to clarify, this ordinance deals with the selling of food from trucks. I'm correct, am I on that?
Yes.
Yes. So we have the carts downtown. We don't have any 100-foot limit that they, from a restaurant or anything, or not?
If a cart or a stand wants to operate within downtown, they would need to lease the public right-of-way space. That space is up for the property owner. They have the first right to it, and if they don't want it, then they can pass it along to somebody else. The carts that we have operating downtown, there was an agreement with Business X and the hot dog stand, and that's why we saw that one operating within downtown.
Okay, so you can have a situation where you have a cart that's within a 100-foot distance of a restaurant. Is that right?
You potentially could, yes.
Okay. Also, too, how many police calls have we had about this issue of the mobile food vendors?
I don't think we have police calls that are tied strictly to mobile vending. Those would be under disturbances, et cetera.
I guess my concern here is that we're trying to come up with a solution for a problem that doesn't even exist.
That's your opinion, sir, and I respectfully disagree.
And I would say that we're allowing the businesses to do it. Right now, you're not supposed to do it.
That's right.
And
I
so
mean, it could just be an all-out ban on mobile vending if
Where's the
problems
ban
arise.
on mobile vending?
Pardon me?
Where's the ban on mobile vending?
Commercial vehicles are not allowed to make a transaction in the public right-of-way. So it's currently not allowed.
So we're loosening that to allow, yes, with
Well-
some restrictions, but if you look at other communities as well, Sioux Falls is Sioux Falls. However, if you go to other communities as well, you'll see they might have 40 to 50 pages of regulation, and we're trying to keep this as loose as possible and allow the free business, the free market to thrive and do.
I wish I could agree with that, but it seems to me we're just beginning, as well, the Argus Leader has come out and been very critical of what we're doing here. Well, once again, I don't see where we have a real problem. We have all these regulations already dealing with the health and things like that, the most important thing. And once again, this seems to be unnecessary. We've had the mobile food vendors for how many years here in Sioux Falls? We seem to get along okay, but all of a sudden now we have to have this.
I wouldn't say this is all of a sudden. This has been going on for quite some time. Looking into this, it comes in phases and waves. But
Yeah, but how long have we had mobile food vendors in Sioux Falls?
I can remember them as a kid parked on private property. Sanchez Taquitos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Adam, again, we're actually trying to authorize them because currently there is an ordinance that prevents them from doing. Can you repeat what that is again, please?
Correct. Commercial vending is not allowed in the public right-of-way. Any sort of sales transactions in the public right-of-way.
So I guess I would go ahead and sponsor an ordinance to eliminate that and take care of this whole issue. That's the easiest way to do it, instead of coming up with all of this additional regulations.
Councilor
If I could just,
go
I wasn't finished. A question of the gentleman that spoke earlier. I'm sorry that.
Peter Chang.
Peter, yeah, Peter. Thank you very much for being here. Do you feel anything that was been covered here this evening, and this puts you on the spot, but you're in the business, and so you're the individual that's here.
Right.
Did you feel that there's anything that's over restrictive and that prevents you from making your living the way you'd like to?
I think that a 100-foot or more, which was I think initially proposed, right, a 300-foot would be terrible because the city blocks here are 400 feet long. So if you're talking about the central business district, I would like to know how many places would actually be allowed then if it was within 300 feet, if the block is 400. So that means if there's a restaurant anywhere on that block that we would not be able to park there. We also have one-way streets, which we can only serve to one side, so we're already limited to half of that street. And then we have no diagonal parking, which I think is valid because obviously we can't stick our truck out in the middle of the road. So if you have no, we can't park already anywhere on Phillips between, let's say, I don't even know where it is, but all the diagonal parking on Phillips, we can't park there already, right? So the truck just doesn't fit, and you can't park in that diagonal space on Phillips. So if that's already limiting, then limiting it further by 100 or by 300 feet, it really limits the whole place that we can vend downtown by quite a bit. And then you have just parking availability. So, it's already kind of tough. Sometimes we drive around downtown like 3 or 4 times circling just to find a place that we can operate, So I think that the distance, the 100 feet is I understand if other businesses want to protect their investments, but it is a public right of way and it's 100 feet. There's nothing stopping somebody to deliver food there as I don't know how to address your committee member Staggers addressed. You can already operate a food like a cart there. Domino's Pizza can deliver there. Jimmy John's can deliver there. There's already options. So it's not like we are hurting the other businesses. So the 100-foot restriction, I'm not sure if it's really going to do a lot. But then again, I'm willing to work with it. We could just park 100 feet away, and I think our customers will still walk that extra 100 feet. The issues maybe being, again, if we want to be there for a business, and across the street that, like if a larger business, let's say a bank, says, we'd like you to come here for our lunch and serve lunch to our employees. Now, if a business across the street says, hey, well, why don't you just have us cater? We don't want that guy parking across the street. I just don't think it's right. Again, it's public right away. So we don't have access to private parking there. The businesses that want private parking, they buy a bigger lot and they can regulate their own private parking if that's what they wish. But if they're using public, right away, then why can't we? Why can't our customers? I think that's the fair thing. The other thing is the time. Stopping at midnight on, I think it's Monday. Is it Sunday to
Thursday.
To Thursdays? The bars don't stop at midnight. My truck is. We spent a lot of money on our truck to make it as quiet as possible. I don't think that the truck itself is what people are saying is loud. I think it's the people. So the truck being there or not being there, that has nothing to do with it. So if there's a regulation that says if you're drunk and you're loud, you get kicked off the street, I think that's already there. It's already in place, right?
Do you have to run generators with your truck when you're
We do run a generator. We run a pretty quiet generator.
Okay. So
again, I believe there are already noise ordinances for generators. You can't have a generator off the truck. You can't, and there are already sound ordinances downtown for decibel levels. I think if we fall within that, I don't know why we would change anything, right?
Okay.
If that's what you're talking about, if you're saying the people are making too much noise, or if you're saying the trucks are making too much noise, I think there are trucks that do make too much noise. But if we've spent the money like I have to make our truck not make that much noise, then I think that should be allowed.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, follow up.
Oh. Yeah, the diagonal parking, can you explain that, when it's allowed, when it's not allowed? I'm still a little confused on that aspect of it.
Where the food window opens up, generally would open up into a parking space, which would be an empty parking space, or where a car is. And then most of these food trucks are too long to fit within a parking stall. I mean, you see a large Ford F-150 parked in a diagonal parking space, not to pick on Ford again, but even you and I know it's kind of tricky to maneuver Phillips Avenue, let alone something longer than that.
They are allowed to are they allowed to parallel park if they're willing to pay for 3 diagonal parking spaces so that people are only on the curbside?
I don't think that would fly with parking, but I can certainly look into the ordinance.
Okay.
Councilor Urbanbach.
And I would say, Councilor Kiley, that wouldn't fly with the businesses that they're parking in front of, because that's taking up parking spaces that are valuable and bringing customers. I guess I would just reiterate again to the gentleman that again, we're talking about packaging all the rules into one place. Yes, we understand the noise ordinance exists. We understand drunk and disorderly exists. We understand parking exists. We're putting it into one package to make it easier to understand. Two questions for you, Adam. One, public parking lots. Are they considered public right-of-way? Can I park my food truck there and sell from a public parking lot? I mean, I'm looking at this map, which has the 100-foot radius around the different restaurant front doors, and it also includes public parking lots. How do those play into this conversation about food trucks?
We've had different conversations with public parking about this very topic. Things that we've seen across the country are designated spaces for mobile food vendors, or opening up those lots after hours for mobile food trucks. We have heard from a few individuals that they would like to see something like that. What they call them around the nation is food hubs, where it's kind of a destination with 4 or 5 food trucks, a couple picnic tables, and really brings people to that area. I'm certainly not opposed to having some discussions with Mr. Nelson about that.
That'd be pretty cool. Then my other one is in regard to whether we have law enforcement calls regarding mobile food trucks. And I guess, one of the prime examples of, and most of it's anecdotal, but one of the prime examples of one of those police calls was sort of a brawl that happened outside a bar. in front of the food trucks because people were fighting over who was in line for the food and people were fighting over, just being people. That it is anecdotal. We don't have direct correlation on those calls, but we do have information that leads us to believe that this does create an issue and that we really need to control those hours. And I know we can't really talk about data, or maybe you can. Do you have data on how those police calls go?
I could talk with Officer Holbeck. He's more well-versed with what's going on near that area. That seems to be a hotspot for mobile food trucks to park.
Mm-hmm. That might be a good part of the conversation to have. Again, we're talking about this package of ordinances, and we're trying to put this all together in one place, so it's easier for people to set up to establish this kind of business. But maybe we do need to have that conversation about there are reasons that we're doing this, that this has created an issue, and we need to be able to we need to have some controls on it in terms of safety and those sorts of things. So that would be a suggestion I'd have.
Councilor Sagers. And then we'll wrap it up here soon.
Yes, I have a couple questions here. Do we license pizza delivery people?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, do we?
That's what I'm asking you.
A driver's license, I'm sure they have one of those.
Well,
what kind of license are you talking about?
Well, we're trying to regulate these mobile food trucks, and
but what we're really looking at is private gain made from public property.
Well,
so the pizza is made on private property and then delivered to a front door. It's not a business set up in the public right-of-way to make a profit.
Yeah, they use the streets, okay, and then they most often probably park on the street as they get out of the car to deliver their pizza and so forth. I was just wondering if we're starting to think about something like this. But also, at the same time, about having an ordinance consolidating all these different regulations that we have. All we have to do is just come up with a little booklet and give it to the mobile food vendor to make sure they comply with. We don't need a new ordinance here or anything like that.
So you're saying we should not allow mobile food vending within our downtown community?
I think I also mentioned, too, that I would be very much in favor of sponsoring an ordinance eliminating that one restriction. Yeah, I think we ought to get rid of that and leave them alone.
That would apply to all commercial vehicles.
That would
We're
open
talking
up a
about
big
mobile
can
food.
of worms.
This is creating a can of worms for these people. That's the problem. The mobile food truck owners. I don't want to get them
out of the 13 or 15 that we had at our meeting, we had one that was opposed to the regulations that we were proposing.
Why don't you take a secret vote and ask them whether they would vote for this or not?
And I've spoke with 3 of them on the phone who heard rumblings about some sort of ordinance coming through, and all of them were satisfied with what they heard.
Why don't you take a secret vote?
And that's exactly what I had right here and presented to you today.
Take a secret vote.
All right, Councilor Sagers, thank you.
Yes, I think that would be the appropriate thing.
I just want to wrap it up here as we need to switch gears to the council meeting. I want to thank you for your presentation. I also want us to be challenged with thinking of how we can promote this downtown and not just take a look at what are we allowing them to do, but what can we do for you to help your business thrive? How can we encourage more people to do it? It offers a unique perspective downtown for people to be able to try your food, try a different kind of food, eat from a hot dog stand. I don't know, whatever it is that these mobile trucks are wanting to bring downtown, I think that we should encourage them to come downtown. Again, it offers a unique perspective and a unique area to be able to grab a bite to eat. I know you've worked really hard on this, and I would encourage you, Mr. Chang, to stay engaged and stay in contact with us as we move forward with this so that we can partner with you and not restrict you with your particular type of business. And I think that's important. I think you've done that, but I think this is a great opportunity for us to continue that conversation. So thank you for the input today, and with that, I am going to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.